muddy water of the Mara River flowed around David Thompson's chest as he pushed against the current. The drowning lion cub held tightly to his shoulders. Just minutes earlier, the 34-year-old wildlife photographer had been setting up his gear on the riverbank when he saw something that would change his life forever. A tiny cub had fallen into the swollen river, carried away by floodwaters that had risen overnight from heavy rains upstream. David had been filming wildlife in Kenya's Masai Mara for 8 years. But he had never broken the main rule of nature: photography. Never get involved with natural events. Until now. The cub, no more than 4 months old, had been playing too close to the water's edge when the soft ground gave way under his small feet. His scared cries as he was pulled downstream by the strong current broke through David's professional focus. Without thinking, David dropped his camera and jumped into the dangerous river. "I could not just watch him drown," David later told people investigating the event. "Every natural feeling I had as a person overrode my training as a wildlife photographer." The rescue almost cost David his life. The Mara River during flood season is risky, full of hidden junk and unpredictable currents that have taken the lives of many animals and several people over the years. As David struggled to reach the struggling cub, a hidden log hit his left shoulder, almost knocking him out. Only his strong desire to save the young lion kept him focused. He finally managed to grab the exhausted animal. The cub, weak from swallowing, river water and panicked from the trauma, immediately wrapped his small paws around David's neck and held on with surprising strength. David could feel the animal's tiny heart beating quickly against his chest as he began the dangerous trip back to shore, fighting against a current that seemed set on pulling them both downstream toward the crocodile-filled waters below. What David did not know as he struggled through the muddy water was that he was being watched. On the riverbank, hidden among the acacia trees, 5 adult lionesses had been following the sound of their missing cub's calls for help. The group had been searching quickly for the young one, following his scent trail to the river's edge, just in time to see David try to rescue him. As David finally reached the shallower water near the bank, tired and out of breath, he looked up to see a sight that made his blood run cold. The entire group was there, not just the 5 lionesses, but also a huge male lion with a dark mane. All stood still in a half-circle around the water's edge. Their amber eyes were fixed on him and the cub he carried. David's mind quickly thought through his choices, but he soon realized he had none. He was stuck in chest-deep water, holding a lion cub, with 6 fully grown lions blocking his way to safety. Any sudden move could cause an attack that would end his life in seconds. The largest lioness, clearly the group's leader, took a step closer to the water. David held his breath, expecting the worst. Lions are very protective of their young, and here he was, a human stranger holding one of their cubs. Everything he knew about lion behavior told him this situation would end badly. But something amazing was about to happen, something that would challenge everything scientists understood about how lions think and act in groups. The leader lioness's eyes were not full of anger or threat. Instead, David noticed something he had never seen in a wild predator's gaze during 8 years of wildlife photography: recognition and what seemed to be thanks. The cub in David's arms began making soft noises, calling to his group. The sound seemed to break the tense silence. And what followed would be recorded on David's waterproof action camera, which had been filming automatically through the entire event. The leader lioness stepped into the shallow water, her large paws making ripples as she moved closer to David. Every muscle in his body tensed, preparing for an attack that never happened. Instead, the lioness stopped just 3 feet away and did something that went against every rule of predator behavior David had studied. She lowered her head in what could only be called a bow. The movement lasted several seconds, during which the other group members remained completely still, as if watching a very important ceremony. When the leader lioness raised her head, she made direct eye contact with David, not the threatening stare of a predator looking at prey, but the steady gaze of understanding between equals. The cub in David's arms became more active, reaching toward his mother with tiny paws while making soft chirping sounds. The leader lioness replied with gentle purring sounds, the same noises lionesses use to talk with their cubs during feeding and grooming. "It is okay, little one," David whispered to the cub, his voice barely heard above the sound of the rushing water. "Your family is here." As if responding to his words, the leader lioness took another step closer. David's heart pounded against his ribs, but something in the lioness's manner told him he was not in danger. Her approach was careful, deliberate, and completely non-threatening. What happened next would be studied by animal behavior experts around the world for years to come. The leader lioness gently extended her massive head toward David, close enough that he could feel her warm breath on his face. For several moments, she simply looked at him, her intelligent amber eyes seeming to judge not just his physical presence, but something deeper. His intentions, his character, his role in saving her cub. Then she did something unheard of in recorded lion behavior. The leader lioness began to groom David. Her rough tongue touched his forehead, the same caring behavior she would show to members of her own group. The action was clear. She was accepting him temporarily as part of her family unit. David remained perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe, as this top predator showed him a level of trust that went against everything he thought he knew about wild animals. The grooming lasted only 30 seconds, but the message was clear to every member of the group. David was not a threat. He was not prey. He was the person who had risked his life to save one of their own. The other lionesses began to move closer, their body language relaxed rather than aggressive. The huge male lion, who had been staying a watchful distance away, walked to the water's edge and lay down, a clear sign that he thought the situation was peaceful. David carefully began moving toward the shore, still carrying the cub. The group moved apart to create a clear path for him, their behavior more like an honor guard than predators surrounding prey. As he reached the muddy bank, David slowly knelt and placed the cub on solid ground. The reunion was immediate and full of emotion. The leader lioness rushed to her child, nuzzling him, carefully checking for injuries and purring with relief. The other lionesses gathered around, each taking turns to sniff and examine the rescued cub. The male lion approached last, his massive head lowering to gently touch the young one with his nose. David remained kneeling on the riverbank, water dripping from his clothes, watching this close family moment happen. He should have been terrified, surrounded by 6 of Africa's most dangerous predators. Instead, he felt honored to see something few humans had ever witnessed: the true emotional connections within a lion group. Dr. Sarah Mbeki, a wildlife biologist who later watched David's video, was amazed by what she saw. The grooming behavior shown by the leader lioness is usually kept for group members, she explained. For a wild lioness to offer this gesture to a human suggests a level of conscious recognition and thanks that challenges our basic understanding of cat social intelligence. As the group settled around their recovered cub, David began to slowly back away, hoping to give them space and avoid disturbing this precious family moment. But the lions had other plans. As David began to move back, the leader lioness looked up from her cub and made a sound he had never heard before in 8 years of documenting African wildlife. It was not a roar or a growl, but a gentle rumbling call that seemed almost like a conversation. The other group members immediately responded, standing up and positioning themselves in a way that took David's breath away. The lions arranged themselves in 2 parallel lines, creating a clear path from where David stood to the acacia tree where his photography equipment waited. It was an escort formation, an honor guard protecting his safe passage away from the river. "Impossible," David whispered, his voice caught by the waterproof microphone still recording every moment. "They are seeing me safely out." The leader lioness took the front position on David's right side, while the huge male lion moved to his left. The 4 other lionesses were on their sides, keeping perfect distance as they began a slow, formal walk away from the riverbank. David found himself in the middle of this amazing procession, surrounded by over 1,500 pounds of top predators who were treating him like an honored guest rather than possible prey. The rescued cub, now well enough to walk, trotted alongside his mother, sometimes looking up at David with what seemed to be curiosity rather than fear. Every few steps, the young one would brush against David's leg, an action of familiarity that left David speechless. As they reached David's equipment, the group stopped. The leader lioness approached David one last time, her massive head tilting slightly as she studied his face. Then, in an action that would be replayed millions of times on social media, she gently pressed her forehead against his, the same greeting behavior lions use with trusted group members. "Thank you," David whispered, not caring if the lions could understand his words. "Thank you for trusting me." The leader lioness stepped back and let out a soft purr, a sound of happiness and goodbye. One by one, each member of the group approached David, briefly touching him with their noses or rubbing against his legs. Even the huge male lion took part, gently bumping David's shoulder with his enormous head before moving away. The rescued cub was the last to say goodbye. The young one sat directly in front of David, tilted his tiny head upward, and made a small purr that sounded very much like a thank you. David reached down and gently stroked the cub's head one final time, both of them seeming to understand that this moment would never happen again. As the group began to move away, heading toward the shade of distant trees for their afternoon rest, David stood alone by his equipment, soaking wet and emotionally overwhelmed by what had just occurred. His action camera had captured every second of the unprecedented encounter. The video would later be confirmed by wildlife experts, studied by animal behaviorists, and shown in documentaries around the world. Dr. Jane Goodall herself would call it one of the most remarkable displays of communication and thanks between different species ever recorded. But for David, the technical analysis mattered less than the deep truth he had experienced firsthand. In that muddy river, surrounded by wild lions who should have seen him as a threat, he had seen something that science was only beginning to understand: the ability for true thanks and recognition across species. The rescued cub grew to full adulthood under the protection of his group, and David continued his photography work in the Masai Mara. On several occasions over the following months, he met the same group during his shoots. Each time, the leader lioness would acknowledge him with a gentle purr, and the now grown lion he had saved would approach his vehicle without fear, sometimes resting in the shade it provided. Local Masai guides began calling David Simba's brother, the man who had been accepted, even if for a short time, into a lion group. Dr. Becky established the Thompson Mara Research Foundation to study the thinking and emotional abilities shown by the group during the rescue. David's experience proves that the lines between human and animal awareness are far more flexible than we ever thought, she wrote in her important paper. What we saw was not just animal behavior. It was a demonstration of values we consider only human: thanks, honor, and the recognition of a moral obligation. For David Thompson, who had started that day simply hoping to photograph wildlife, the event became a life-changing reminder that kindness is a universal language, spoken and understood by creatures we are only just beginning to truly know.